carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
And welcome back to Micro Queers. It's your once monthly queer horror short roundup, and I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and everyone, we are discussing Heather Harris's Crush, a short film involving a couple and, some suicidal tendencies.
Indeed, yeah. Content warning for those who haven't seen the short. This is basically all about suicide, so wade in considering your own mental health.
Very, very much so. It is about suicide.
Literally. The whole short. That's what it is.
Yeah, why don't you take us through this log line here, Joe?
All right, so when former writer Grayson, played by Kat Faraway, is contacted by the Suicide Survivors Association to write a speech, she uses the opportunity to move beyond her painful past. However, as she becomes consumed by her writing, she discovers a new, darker side to her girlfriend Grace, played by Paige Herschel, and ultimately herself.
So yeah, I mean, this is about a 14-minute short, Joe, and I will confess. So I think that this movie is shot pretty well. I think the acting is pretty good.
For the most part. Yeah.
For the most part. It didn't blow me away, but it was fine. I will confess, I am a little, I'm trying to be nice here, but a little tired of these kind of, these narratives where we don't know if our protagonist is in the right, well, I guess in this case, we kind of know she's not in the right frame of mind. Mm-hmm. But we're like, oh, she's seeing things, she's not seeing things. There's probably a twist where someone in their life isn't actually there.
Right.
I don't know. Yes.
Took the long way to get around to it, but yeah, I feel similarly. This idea of the unreliable protagonist who, yes, is seeing visions. In this case, it's absolutely, you can see it coming a mile away that the girlfriend is not a real person, or you wonder, she's not there half the time. That's the kind of idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the film doesn't go out of its way to really explain what she represents or what she is. It leaves it up to you, the viewer, which I think it's interesting. I looked through some of the comments in this video, and some were like, "I bet she was the paramedic that revived her when she tried to die by suicide."
Right.
I would argue, though, since we have a Grayson and a Grace, that this is more of a part of her mental state of mind.
Yes, yeah. So, like you, I wasn't 100% on board with this one the first time I watched it. And then when I rewatched it for this recording, I did note that someone says in the comments, this feels like Grace, so this is the girlfriend, is a manifestation of Grayson's, as in the main character's, survival strategy. So she needed a girlfriend who would motivate her, who would encourage her, who would love her when she was recovering from her suicide attempt. But then when she starts to spiral, that same manifestation is now feeding into her darker impulses, is pushing her to revisit those thoughts of suicide and so on. And I thought that makes the short a little bit more interesting than what it may conventionally look like on initial watches.
I agree, but then, I want to say about 2/3 of the way through it, we get the Shining homage where, she's just written the same thing over and over and over and over in her notebook, and I was, pulled out of it a little bit.
Right.
Because I was like, oh, well, you're just doing the Shining. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue at the end of the day, is that there just isn't enough here that feels distinct or new. Like, we've seen this storyline before. As we said, the acting is okay. I find it gets a little bit melodramatic when the women start to fight or when they start to get catty with each other. But it looks great. It's well shot. It's hitting all of these familiar points. And yet, because it's not doing enough new, I just felt like, okay, well, I've seen this before, and it honestly feels like we've seen a lot of this recently.
Yes, and granted now, let's hone in on the time period, right? Because you're saying recently, and this was uploaded to YouTube in September of 2020. Did it actually get made before that?
So this is tricky with Alter because Alter usually picks up shorts after they've done a festival run. So I didn't double check, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's probably a year or two older than that.
Got it. So, I mean, that makes maybe a little bit more sense for me. And, we are dealing with a queer horror short, which is something that we are seeing a lot more of nowadays.
Yes.
But, if anyone saw the movie Hypochondriac earlier this year and listened to our episode on it, you'll see that I also had similar complaints where it's kind of like, we're getting this same kind of story, but gay. And
right.
I would argue that Hypochondriac maybe is a little bit better because A, it has more runtime to deal with, but it deals with the gay part of it more, whereas this is more, she happens to be gay.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we're still in that kind of like weird tension-filled moment where we're not exactly sure what kind of queer representation is going to be the most satisfying. Like on one hand, we could praise this short for saying she just happens to be queer, right? Like this could easily be a man in her life, but it's not. It's a woman. I think for the purposes of the short, it makes more sense if we do think of Grace as a manifestation of herself, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, I project a similar gendered version to myself. But then there's the other half where it's like, well, but if you're going to make her have a girlfriend because she has either bi or lesbian inclinations, do something a little bit more with that. Like, I think this is definitely a challenge with a short runtime, is that at the end of the day, their relationship isn't really the central part of this short. Like, that's not the defining aspect of the narrative, but it does leave us wanting as a result.
Well, it's also because, there is no relationship. So this, I was thinking even at first, oh, maybe this is a girlfriend that died, which put her into a depression, which led her on her path to suicide.
You're like, let me fill in this backstory.
Yeah.
I'm just going to imagine spitball for a little bit.
But as soon as she calls the mom, and the mom's like, who's Grace, honey? And it's like, oh, okay. So she never existed.
Made it all up. Yeah.
Right. Now, granted, there's something to be said here about, because the whole thing is, she's trying to write this speech for a suicide survivors group, and apparently it's an amazing speech.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really come to much, and based on how this short ends, I don't know. But what are your thoughts on the end of this movie, Joe?
Yeah, so it seems pretty obvious that we're not going to end on a happy note, and, to a certain extent, everything happens as a result of her accepting this opportunity to write it out. And you think, okay, it could be cathartic. It could be her opportunity to return to writing after she's taken a breather to, recover and regain her composure after her suicide attempt. And that doesn't happen. So she does end up, the short suggests that she dies at the end.
Right. And
it feels thematically on point, but I also found it kind of gauche that the short ends with her dipping under the water. So she's constantly having these dreams where she revisits her suicide attempt, which was drowning herself in a pool with weights. So she's constantly sinking under the water or pushing Grace under the water and so on. And here she sinks under the water, and we hear the audio of a phone message left by this suicide group saying, the speech is great and it's going to save so many lives. And of course, it's ironically juxtaposed with herself dying.
Right.
And I was just like, so what is the message here? Because it feels like this ending, well, as I said, thematically on point.
Right.
It feels like basically what it's saying is, oh, well, her trying to revisit her trauma is what ultimately ends up killing her, but it's fine because she's going to save a bunch of other random anonymous people's lives. Like, what?
Okay. So, well, no, because it's interesting. So, it's funny because one of the things about Hypochondriac that I said was unexpected was that movie has a bit of an optimistic ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're both a big fan of that ending.
Yes, and because I'm used to seeing films, or this, especially in the genre, have sad endings. That being said, the ending of this film was the one part where I was like, oh, that's ballsy, and I almost appreciate it. I get what you are saying with Gauche. I do almost think... look, yes, when you're coming to the messaging, that is kind of what it gets across for me. However, I appreciate the fact that it's not sugary sweet about how not everyone makes it through depression and suicide attempts. So on a level, I guess it's where the thematic reasoning comes in, right?
Well, you're talking about realism, right?
Yes.
And that's not always something that we get in horror movies. And particularly, you're right, when we're dealing with issues like mental health and especially suicide, it's not like, cool, now I'm just better and I'm never going to struggle with this again. And yeah, there's that optimistic side that we get in Hypochondriac that feels very welcome after, 90 minutes of watching Zach Villa struggle against his demons.
Right.
And here it's like, okay, it's 13 minutes, so we're not getting quite the same insight into this character. I think it rang a little bit more like, well, we need to end this short on a bang, because we've often talked about how shorts ultimately go out with either a twist or a big scare or something. And I was like, I just don't know how I feel about using suicide as a, ooh, here's the twist.
See, and it's interesting because to me it was more so like a, hey, it's okay to take more time between the inciting incident of trauma and facing it head on.
And trying to push through. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But that being said, though, when you said, but it's okay because she's going to save a bunch of lives, that I didn't even consider that aspect of it. And that does make it feel a bit more gauche to me, like you said.
Yeah.
But that being said, though, I mean, yeah, it's more so like, yeah, messaging I think is a little bit wonky. However, yeah, the realism, I appreciated that more than you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate what you're saying as well. So I'm happy to have had the conversation because I feel like maybe we both softened a little bit or taken different points away. Mm-hmm. I will say one other thing that I think would have helped me with this ending. I think this would have been a perfect opportunity to have ended with a real life suicide prevention hotline or, hey, if you or someone is struggling with this, reach out. You're not alone. Like it felt like a really big missed opportunity to not have that there. Yeah,
no, I am actually in complete agreement. Actually, I'm in complete agreement with you on that.
Normally, I completely disagree with you.
No, you're right. And I mean, look, it's a short film. They're probably, I would feel like it was more egregious if this was like a major production, like a major film. Sure. But yeah, no, I think I'm inclined to agree with you more on that aspect. I mean, again, like when we're talking about suicide, like there's a lot of responsibility that goes into that topic, right?
Mm-hmm. And as we said, I mean, I think this is a short that's worth checking out, if only because it's a female writer-director and it's an all-female cast and it is well done. Like it looks really good. It's edited very well. I think the music is actually really helpful. So it's not like I'm saying this short is bad, don't watch it. I'm just saying I think there were things that could have been done a little bit differently that maybe should have been handled with a touch more care.
Yeah, and I mean, again, for me, I mean, not to say I'm not offended by this, but like it's really more just like I'm a little tired of seeing the same kind of story. And it's kind of a thing where it's like, hey, non-queer people have gotten to tell these stories for a very, very, very long time. And obviously when you're queer, there can be more mental health issues that are attached to that because of the discrimination we face as a community. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm just a little tired of seeing the same kind of narrative trope in horror films of this ilk.
Right. So. Yeah. That's more of an us issue than an it issue, but it's definitely, yeah, I think we're just going to keep beating this drum of, okay, if you're choosing to go down this unreliable protagonist who's seeing visions and struggling with mental health, it's something that we're getting a lot of it lately. Yeah. And as a result, we are becoming either, I don't want to say immune to it, but we are becoming a little resistant to some of its novelty. So we're looking for either people who are doing it a little bit differently, like say maybe Hypochondriac and the way that they end, or I don't know.
I know, like I feel like, but that's you failing to come up with an answer for the other one is because we keep seeing the same things over and over. And so, had I seen this 4 years ago, maybe I'd feel a little bit differently.
It's true.
Anyway, well, listeners, let us know what you thought of Crush. I mean, again, we're kind of lukewarm on it, but there are good things here, and definitely plenty to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, well, I guess until our next minisode, we can cross out Crush.
Indeed, and cross out microqueers.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kennett Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.
Hello, I'm Shelby Scott, the host of Scare You to Sleep, a podcast where I tell you spooky bedtime stories full of creepy sound effects and music that is soothing yet unsettling to help immerse you into a world of horror. This is a show for those of us who have realized horror can be a strange but relaxing escape from reality. Speaking of escapes, sometimes I lead you through guided nightmares, like a guided meditation, but instead of flowery meadows, I take you on a journey through your own personal nightmare. So come get lost in the terror with me. Listen to Scare You to Sleep wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm. Sweet screams.